Welcome everyone again to the 5th live session of Learning Geology, Evolution of Earth. Just to introduce to people who are joining us for the first time, Learning Geology is a community organization and we aim to promote geoscience literacy worldwide. We have an amazing team of editors on our Facebook page that help us create different type of content for different audiences to promote geoscience education, literacy, and promote awareness of geosciences worldwide. Today's live session is one of the 7 live session of Sustained Geoscience Project by Learning Geology, and recordings of all these live sessions are available on Learning Geology Facebook page. If you want to join the next 2 live sessions, please register on the link shown on the screen. A bit introduction about Rachel. So Rachel Phillips, a geoscience Ph.D. student, soon to be a doctor, and she studies at the University of Texas, El Paso in USA. She's also an amazing science communicator. She runs her YouTube channel, GeoGirl. Please do check it out if you haven't. My name is Qasim, and I'm a co-founder at Learning Geology. I'm also a PhD student at the University of Prince Edward Island in Canada. So today's live session, you'll learn the story of Earth's history, role of air, water, rocks, and minerals have played in driving the evolution of Earth. So please stick around, and now I'll hand over to Rachel.
All right, let's see. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Let me minimize this. Let's put that there. Okay, so yeah, like you mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the evolution of Earth, the story of Earth history. That's kind of what I've taught for the longest, and that is also related to my research, which I'll talk briefly about here in a second. But yeah, like you said, I'm Rachel Phillips. I am a PhD student at UTEP, and also I like to post educational geoscience videos on YouTube, and I'll show you guys the link later if you want to go check that out. So the talk today will be broken out into first a little bit about my background, who I am, what I do, and then how kind of Earth has evolved through time for its 4.55 billion year history. We'll start with the Precambrian, which is kind of this big block of time in Earth's history that went from the beginning of Earth's formation till 550 million years ago, and then the kind of second major block in Earth's history, which is the Phanerozoic eon that we are currently in, which went from around 550 million years ago till the present. And so with this, we'll talk about how Earth formed, the formation of Earth's atmosphere, oceans, and land, first life on Earth, and with that, the first kind of rise in oxygen event on Earth, because oxygen, like that we breathe, wasn't always around on Earth. And with that came these major glaciations called snowball Earth events that are really cool. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then jump into the Cambrian explosion, which is kind of the major event that kicked off the Phanerozoic. That was the big diversification of animal life, because early in the Precambrian, it was mainly just microbes, so microorganisms, tiny slime-like stuff. And then animals evolved and exploded. And then you had mass extinctions happen periodically through this eon. So I'll talk about some of those. And then lastly, the age of dinosaurs, and then the transition to the age of mammals, our age. So first off, who am I and what do I do? Like he already mentioned, I am a PhD student. I'm hopefully going to graduate within like next semester, hopefully is what will happen. But I am at UTEP, and I study biogeochemistry, which is like this big long fancy word, but it really just means that I study the biological and chemical makeup of rocks to reconstruct ancient conditions on Earth, the ancient ocean and atmospheric conditions. Why? Because this helps us understand modern and predict future climate change and ocean acidification trends, as well as it helps with astrobiology, which is another fancy word, but it just means looking for life on other worlds. Because anytime you're looking at biological signatures in rocks, you can apply that to other worlds, other moons and planets in our solar system, looking at their rocks and see if there's any biosignatures. Because, you know, finding extant life, living life, is really hard to find, but sometimes we can find its signatures in the rocks. And we use that for both studying Earth history and looking for life on other worlds. So that's kind of my research and its applications. And how I initially got into geology was that I was interested in all things science, and I couldn't choose just one. And what I love about geology, meaning the study of Earth, is that it really does bring you to the intersection of all sciences. You get to study how Earth chemistry, biology, and physics work together to, you know, make Earth what it is, as well as, you know, other worlds, of course. So I think it just really, it's the most kind of versatile field of science, and it really just appealed to me in that way. So that's why I got really into geology, and I'm still really into it. And also why I love talking about it to the public and students and whoever through YouTube. And so if you do want to check out my channel, the QR code will take you there, or you can use the link or go check out my website. But yeah, basically I wanted to show this prior to the kind of lecture part of my talk, because if there is anything that I go over in today's talk that you want to know more details about or anything, or I don't, you know, answer all your questions about it, chances are I have a video about it. So you can check it out there. All right, so without further ado, let's get into the actual evolution of Earth. Of course, starting with the Precambrian, which is kind of this unofficial term for the big chunk of time that makes up the 4.55 billion year to 542 million year Earth history period. And this includes the Hadean eon, the Archean eon, and the Proterozoic eon. And so we'll kind of sequentially go through each one of these and kind of the major events that happened. However, the elephant in the room on this slide is just how much of the time scale the Precambrian makes up. It is nearly 90% of Earth's history, and there were no animals around. I mean, there were some at the very end of the Precambrian, but for most of this, there were no big, large, complex multicellular life. There wasn't plants, like it wasn't green Earth, like it was very different. And it only was recently that Earth looked, you know, similar to the way it looks now. So I just love showing this to scale, time scale, because I think a lot of people don't put it to scale and they expand the part we know more about, which is the tiny Phanerozoic part that's more recent. And it's really, most of it was just kind of rocks and microbes and water. So I just think that's really cool. But there's still a lot of cool events that happened in the Precambrian, such as the formation of Earth. So we'll start with in the Hadean eon, or at the beginning of the Hadean, 4.5 billion years ago, Earth accreted from material in this thing called the solar nebula. It was a big spinning thing of dust in space. And all the planets in the sun accreted from this material. And Earth accreted specifically from material rich in iron, magnesium, and silicon. And this meant that early on, when Earth was accreting, it was very hot and molten. And it was just, I mean, it was just this big ball of like magma, basically. And it was hot for three major reasons. That there were three major things that contributed to the heat, and that was impacts from accretion. And as it grew, it gained more gravity and drew in more impacts and just kept getting, you know, bigger. It actually wasn't until planets like Jupiter and Saturn, big gas giants, drew in so much gravity that other terrestrial planets like ours stopped accreting because they were drawing up away all the material. But yeah, so we had impacts contribute heat, gravitational compression, and radioactive decay. Radioactive decay is just that basically there are elements on Earth that are unstable in their current form and they undergo decay over time, and due to this process they release heat. And so that on early Earth was a really major source of heat. It's most of these things have decayed by now and they're already stable, but a lot of them are still decaying and still produce heat on modern Earth too. But because Earth was so hot originally and molten, this allowed time for layers to kind of differentiate in the interior of Earth. So as Earth cooled from this kind of molten liquid state, it differentiated into different layers, including the inner core, the outer core, the mantle, and the crust. The reason being is that denser things sink to the core, like iron. We have an iron-rich core, and we have a less dense silicon-rich crust. So that's why, we have these layers with distinct compositions. And thank goodness for the iron core formation, because we also had a liquid iron core form. And this liquid iron core actually led to the formation of the magnetosphere, which protects Earth from harmful solar radiation and solar winds, which if, scientists hypothesize that if the iron core were to solidify, the liquid part of it, then the magnetosphere would disappear, and that would probably make Earth uninhabitable. So it's like really important that we have this, and I think it's an unappreciated thing about what allows life to happen on Earth. And so we had Earth formed and the layers within it form, and then the atmosphere was also starting to form very early on during this whole time. The atmosphere was forming because Earth was super hot and molten, so it was really volcanically active. There was rampant volcanism, and because of this, these volcanoes were releasing gases like crazy. This was called outgassing. So this first early atmosphere formed from this major outgassing from volcanoes on early Earth, and they were releasing all sorts of gases like CO2, water vapor, hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur dioxide, methane, and ammonia, which made up the early atmosphere. And one of the major components listed here is water vapor, because eventually, once Earth cooled down to below boiling point, this water vapor from the atmosphere condensed to form Earth's oceans. Now, a lot of the water did come from impacts then and continued into the time that water was condensing, but a lot of it did come from this early atmosphere that condensed. This is really important. However, if you look at this list of gases and this early atmosphere figure here, there is something missing that is kind of major in our modern atmosphere. It's the thing we breathe. It's oxygen. Molecular oxygen wasn't around in the early atmosphere, and it's just because the process that forms molecular oxygen in large amounts hadn't evolved yet, and that is photosynthesis. So we'll talk a little bit about when photosynthesizing organisms evolved and started to produce oxygen, and this two major oxygen rise events that they caused, and how significant they were for not only the evolution of oxygen breathing life, but also climatic events and changes. So then we had the atmosphere form, and of course the ocean, like I mentioned, formed as water vapor condensed from this atmosphere as Earth cooled down to below the boiling point of water. And in addition to the water vapor making up the oceans, the CO2 that was really rich in Earth's early atmosphere was heavily concentrated in these early oceans because there was so much of it in the early atmosphere. And when CO2 increases in water content, it basically increases the acidity. It lowers the pH, makes it really acidic. And so early on Earth, the first ocean was pretty acidic. However, because of this acidity in the early ocean, it started to quickly chemically weather the rocks that it was sitting on. And this just means it started to dissolve them. And this led to the partial dissolution of these rocks, and this contributed salts to the ocean. This led to the salinity that the ocean is today eventually. And the increase in salinity at the time, one of the ions, there's NaCl, but there's also other ions that make up salts. And one of the ions that helps to make up salts is calcium. And a lot of calcium ions were being delivered to the ocean from chemical weathering at the time. And this reacted with the bicarbonate from the CO2 and created calcium carbonate. That, in other words, is limestone, which is the major buffer of our modern ocean. In other words, it buffers the pH to keep it around neutral and keep it from increasing or decreasing really rapidly. And so eventually, as large deposits of limestone started to form, this led to the buffering of the ocean. Well, it increased it to around neutral pH and then buffered it around that zone. So thankfully, the ocean was not very acidic for very long. It became neutral relatively quickly and stayed like that pretty much for all of Earth's history. Of course, there's like small fluctuations which can cause major extinction events, but there wasn't anything huge. So now we've talked about all the major Hadean things. So Earth accreted, Earth's inner layers formed, Earth's atmosphere and oceans formed. But then we moved to the Archean, which goes from around 4 to 2.5 billion years ago. to get to actually how continental crust formed. Because yes, we talked about how the layers formed, but initially on Earth, the crust was kind of just one big layer. It wasn't differentiated into two types of crust like it is today. On Earth today, we have oceanic crust and continental crust. On early Earth, it was just like one big crust. But there was a process that differentiated oceanic crust from continental crust. And this has to do basically with the fact that oceanic crust comes directly from the mantle that extrudes from mid-ocean ridges. So parts where tectonic plates are pulling apart in the ocean, and that lets mantle material come up and form new crust at Earth's surface. But whenever any of this crust, even early Earth's like homogeneous crust, whenever that remelts, that's getting pushed out of Earth's surface, so it's getting pushed under something else, whether it be oceanic crust or a different crust, whatever. Whenever it remelts, every time crust material remelts, it causes it to fractionate in a way that the next product that reaches Earth's surface is less dense. In igneous petrology, we call it more felsic. It gets really chemistry-y, but the point is every time it remelts from subduction and remelting and volcanism, it leads to less dense material forming continental crust. And eventually a bunch of small, tiny continental crust pods formed from this remelting of oceanic crust and then continued remelting. And then they accreted with one another to finally form large continental land masses. And this, like 80% of continental land masses were created in the Archean and have been around till today, which is pretty cool. And now we get to first life on Earth. Life also is thought to have appeared in the Archean eon from 4 to 2.5 billion years ago. There is like slight evidence that it could have been like at around 4.1 or slightly like older in the late Hadean, but it's really hand wavy evidence. The more confirmed evidence is like 3.5 billion years ago. But yeah, so life on Earth is thought to have evolved around this time, but life in Precambrian rocks is really rare to find, like, the fossil record for, and that is for three major reasons. One, there are a few Precambrian rocks exposed at Earth's surface. They're very old. So older rocks are overlain with younger rocks because younger sediment deposits on top of them and covers them up. And then we don't see them because they're not at the surface. We can only pretty much look at what's at the surface. So one, they're hidden. Two, there's not that many Precambrian sedimentary rocks, meaning sedimentary rocks are the types of rocks that contain fossils. And a lot of those sedimentary fossil containing Precambrian rocks have been altered either by fully remelting to igneous rocks or by being put under heat and pressure to make metamorphic rocks, and that disintegrates any fossil content. So a lot of the Precambrian rocks have been altered and there's no fossils that are really well preserved left. So that's another reason. And the third reason is that Precambrian organisms didn't preserve very well. They didn't have skeletons or shells or any hard parts of any kind. And so because of this, they were pretty much just microbial cells, so they didn't preserve very well. I mean, like, if we die, our skeletons will preserve, but our fleshy bits won't unless we're like frozen. So that's like a really big problem with like microbial or non-hard part life. It just doesn't preserve very well, and we have a very poor fossil record of it. However, there is an exception. Cyanobacterial mats. These guys are like the main thing we have fossil evidence for the Precambrian, because these are bacterial mats that form basically like layered communities of bacteria, but they like to secrete and incorporate sediment into their mat structure to keep it robust. And when they do this, that sediment, not their cells per se, but their sediment gets preserved as what we call stromatolites. And these stromatolites date back to 3.5 billion years ago. And their record is just really robust in the rock record because these things preserve really well. And what's really important about these things isn't just that they were life, but they were oxygen producing life. These were the first, or likely first, oxygen producing photosynthesizers on Earth, and they were completely globally widespread. They really just evolved and then rapidly diversified and became abundant and widespread throughout Earth. And this led to a global rise in oxygen in Earth's atmosphere, the first major global rise in oxygen. And this is called the Great Oxygenation Event or Great Oxidation Event, or GOE. And this was because they spread globally so quickly and produced oxygen, but also because animals weren't around to breathe oxygen yet. So nothing was like combating that process and like taking up the oxygen. It was just them taking up CO2 and producing oxygen. So there was this huge like one-way oxygen increase. And that actually happened a couple times in Earth's history. The first time was at that GOE, which was caused by the cyanobacteria around 2.4 billion years ago. And that coincided with a major glaciation. And then the second oxygenation event was around 700 to 600 million years ago, called the New Proterozoic Oxygenation Event, another major oxygen rise. And this coincided with another snowball Earth event, or potentially two distinct events. And the oxygen rise at this point rose oxygen to near modern levels and was likely one of the major factors contributing to the Cambrian explosion, or at least the allowance of animal life to evolve and diversify, because oxygen levels at that point were high enough to allow big, complex, multicellular life to evolve and diversify. Now, I do want to mention here kind of the reason that snowball Earth events coincide with oxygen rises is just because, the thing that causes oxygen rise, the cyanobacteria, in the case of the GOE, take up carbon dioxide to then produce oxygen. And so when they're doing this, they're decreasing the greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere, and that leads to typically a cooling event to coincide with the oxygen rise. However, I do want to mention that the snowball Earth associated with the GOE is less robust in terms of rock evidence than the NOE associated snowball Earth or Earth events, just because we have less of a rock record for it. And there are some rocks at that age that kind of negate the fact that there was a global ice age. So there's just some competing evidence with this one. But these events here around 700 to 600 million years ago are pretty robust. So there was a major snowball Earth event at this time. And I actually have a snowball Earth video on my channel where I talk about how that event may have actually kind of accelerated the evolution of multicellularity. And so you can check that out if you want to know more about that. But the major thing that we want to talk about that it kind of kicked off potentially is the Cambrian explosion, which occurred around 542 million years ago and was kind of the first major diversification of animal life that kind of set Earth on this, trajectory of animals dominating, ecosystems on Earth. Because the Precambrian was dominated by single-celled organisms. So it's a big shift that we had the large multicellular complex animal life become dominant after the Cambrian. However, I do like to mention when I talk about this, that explosion and Cambrian actually might both be kind of misleading terms, because one, we now know after looking further into the rock record and kind of getting a greater picture of what happened, that it was more of a pre-Cambrian explosion. Meaning that in the period just before the Cambrian, around 570 million years ago, in the Ediacaran period, there was kind of an explosion of animal life, but it was all soft-bodied animal life without skeletons or shells. So it wasn't preserved very well, except for very particular rock sections on Earth that we can still find like their imprints. But because of this, we didn't know for a long time that was there. And now that we do, we know that animals actually evolved and diversified quite a bit before the Cambrian actually began. And then when the Cambrian began, which is like globally well preserved, it was because it was less of an animal evolving thing and more of an animal evolving skeletons thing. They all started to evolve hard parts really quickly, in part due to a couple major reasons. One, calcium and phosphorus and other ions were really starting to become delivered to the ocean in greater amounts at that time, which are materials used to create skeletons. So they were more available, more thermodynamically favorable to secrete skeletons and shells. And another major reason was natural selection. Predators began to evolve. And anytime you had predators evolve, prey needs to evolve defenses. And skeletons and shells were the major things that like if you had a shell, you lived, and if you didn't, you likely died out. So natural selection at its finest was another major thing that helped to kick off the skeletonization event. Another reason explosion is slightly misleading is because now that we've gotten a greater picture of what's happened at this time, it seems to have been potentially a little bit more progressive, or kind of just a normal evolution diversification rate rather than really rapid like we initially thought. But overall, it's still a really important event in Earth's history, the Cambrian explosion. And after the Cambrian explosion, throughout the Phanerozoic eon, there have since been 5 major mass extinctions that we kind of call like the big 5 mass extinctions in the Phanerozoic. And these include the Ordovician mass extinctions, Devonian mass extinctions, Permo-Triassic, late Triassic, and Cretaceous Paleogene mass extinctions. Those are the ones that took out the non-avian dinosaurs. However, unfortunately, I wish I had time to talk about all 5 of these. I don't. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the largest one, the Permo-Triassic, which is the greatest extinction of all time, at least that we know of based on our fossil record. And it's so large, it was so large that we nicknamed it the Great Dying, which is a really positive name. And it took out nearly 96% of marine species and 75% of vertebrate families. And I say families as a taxonomic group that's larger than species, not like families. So it took out a lot of life, and it was just really, really devastating. But there's silver linings in mass extinctions that afterwards ecosystems come back very differently, in most cases also stronger in a lot of ways and more diverse. So this kind of changed and shifted kind of the trajectory of ecosystems throughout the rest of Earth's history. And if it didn't happen, we probably wouldn't be here, so still silver lining. But what caused such a drastic event? As you can probably imagine, it was a multitude of things that kind of came together to create the perfect storm. And that is the case. There were 2 major triggers that kind of set off the climate changes that eventually led to the actual killing of the organisms. The 2 major triggers are volcanism and tectonics. Volcanism, lava flows were covering, this is a crazy stat to me. This is insane. I mean, it's pretty robust evidence because, lava flows are pretty well preserved in rocks, but they basically covered over 1 million square kilometers based on the rock record, which is really crazy. And I can't remember the exact amount of time. I have a video about this extinction event if you want to check it out. I think I say it there, but I think it was like 2 million years that these volcanoes kept erupting. And I'm like, that's just over that area for 2 million years. It created so much damage. And it also created so much damage to the atmosphere that the ozone was damaged, and that increased UV radiation, which is one of the things that likely contributed to extinctions, because UV radiation basically deteriorates DNA and life, and yeah, it's not good. The other trigger for the climate changes that eventually led to this event was tectonics. Pangea, a major supercontinent at the time, had formed, and so all the continents were mashed into one, and that caused sea level to fall. So coastal ecosystems fell, disappeared. And then a very high increased dryness or aridity throughout most of the middle continent, because so much of the land in the supercontinent was far away from the ocean, and it was just really becoming more and more dry. And so what these triggers kind of led to was an increase in warming, because there was just a huge amount of greenhouse gases released from the incredibly long-term and large area volcanism at the time, which releases carbon dioxide and methane gases already, which are greenhouse gases. But on top of that, it was placed into coal deposits that were already in that area, and that burnt more carbon and led to more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and that led to this really high spike in warming, and that was really devastating. And this increased CO2 actually also causes ocean acidification, like we talked about earlier. Anytime you have an increase in CO2, that causes the ocean to acidify. Yes, there's buffers, but even if it changes a little, most organisms like coral reefs and stuff, these are really sensitive to any sorts of pH and temperature changes, to the point that entire ecosystems could fall, because this major ecosystem, holding together species could, die. And then it also caused ocean anoxia. Increases in CO2 lead to a decrease in oxygen in the ocean. And that's bad, because animal life in the ocean needs oxygen to respire. So that was really devastating and caused a lot of the extinctions as well. So these were the major triggers and causes, but then you had exacerbating things that caused it to be even worse because you had feedback mechanisms. Climate feedback mechanisms can go either way, can either exacerbate a current trend, which is called a positive feedback, or balance it out, which is called a negative feedback. But positive feedbacks during warming or cooling events, for that matter, can be really detrimental because the warming at this time led to ice melting, and that leads to lower albedo, which is Earth's reflectivity of its surface, and that leads to more solar radiation being absorbed and more warming, and so on and so on. So that exacerbates the current trend, as does warming that melts frozen methane hydrates, releasing methane, a potent greenhouse gas, to the atmosphere, and that causes more warming, and so on and so on. So these positive feedback mechanisms also cause this event, as well as all of the other mass extinction events, to be just really dramatic. But there was really great times for life after this event, including the age of dinosaurs and age of mammals. Now, I do want to point out for this time scale, it's not like the horizontal one I had earlier, is not to scale. So keep in mind that the Cenozoic is expanded here. Actually, I think the Cretaceous is longer than the entire Cenozoic. So keep in mind that this is just really exaggerated, and the Mesozoic, the age of dinosaurs, was way longer than like our age. So the age of dinosaurs started right after that PT extinction, that great dying. That was at 250 million years ago, and dinosaurs evolved around 240 million years ago in the Triassic period, the first period of the Mesozoic era. And there was actually one of the major big five mass extinctions, the late Triassic mass extinction at that time, right at the end of the Triassic period. And that you would think would have made it hard for dinosaurs to survive, but actually they survived like really well, and it almost was like they were immune to this extinction event, and all it did was clear out all the other terrestrial animals so that dinosaurs could like rule even harder. So really the extinction event, this one actually benefited them, because then they ruled from after that extinction event 200 million years ago to 66 million years ago, like every terrestrial environment you can imagine. And mammals, all the while, were around. They evolved as well in the Triassic. I think just after dinosaurs, dinosaurs were 240. I think mammals were like 220 million years ago. So, and it's curious, if mammals had come slightly before, would things have been opposite, But they didn't. So they remained small until dinosaurs went, well, not fully extinct, but nearly extinct at the end Cretaceous mass extinction around 66 million years ago. Once that happened, mammals were able to take over because all the dinosaurs in the terrestrial niches were wiped out, and then mammals could take over those niches. And they did. In the Cenozoic era, mammals rapidly diversified, like really rapidly diversified. And this was not only due to the empty niches available from the lack of dinosaurs, but also due to continental split. Remember that at 250 million years ago, when the big great dying happened, there was Pangea, a supercontinent. They were all smashed together. But throughout the Mesozoic, they were slightly starting to split apart. And by the Cenozoic, they were splitting way far away from each other. And this led to geographical isolation of populations of the same species, which just leads to the formation of new species faster. So faster diversification. And so this and the lack of dinos really helped mammals to diversify in the Cenozoic. And by the end of the very first period of the Cenozoic, the Paleogene, they had already formed most modern mammal groups, including bats, primates, ungulates, whales, rodents, and carnivores. And from there, they just continued to diversify and become advanced and stuff. So that is Earth history in as short as a time as I can get it. Unfortunately, I can't see like the Facebook comments, so like Custom's going to hopefully read some out to me. But if you do have questions that I don't have time to answer here, you can go over to my YouTube channel and comment, and I hopefully will answer you there if we don't have time to reach all of them right now.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was amazing presentation, and you really explained a lot of things in a really short amount of time. Yeah. So I have a question. What do you think of the sixth mass extinction, Holocene extinction by humans?
I try and, yeah, of course. I try and, this is a topic I try and steer clear of because people like to, on YouTube, they like to see a title and then comment without watching it. But yeah, no, I think it's really important. I think it's real, which is, I just think I get all the time, because I talk mostly about Earth's history, because that's what I study. But I get questions all the time about like, you know, so there are two major things I see a lot. One, this has happened throughout Earth's history, so why are we like worried about it happening now? Well, every time it's happened throughout Earth's history, like many things go extinct, so like we should worry about it. And the second thing I see a lot is the debating over what caused it. I think there's clear evidence. I could talk about carbon isotopes and like how we can tell that we contribute a lot, but I don't think it matters at all. I think that debate just wastes time. Like if we can do something about it, let's do it. Like who cares what if whales caused it? I wouldn't care. We humans have the brilliance in our brains. We've evolved over Earth history to become smart enough now to do something, and I think that's incredible, and we should take advantage of that. Like if the dinos had the technology to steer that asteroid away, would they not have? Yes. Like, I just think it doesn't matter who caused it. Like, let's just do something about that. There's no reason to debate that. But I do think it's real and ever present and happening, and there is a kind of sense of urgency around it, and it should be taken seriously.
Yeah, I agree to that. And I see one of your story on your YouTube channel that we don't really need to save the earth. We need to save ourselves because earth will heal itself. And
Yeah, I think a lot of people, even if they have good intentions, kind of hold up signs that say save Earth, and I'm like, Earth is gonna be fine, guys. Like what it's so funny to me because Earth has undergone changes like this all the time, and it's not really bad for it to become warmer or anything. It's just that the current biota that have evolved to the current conditions on Earth suffer when things change rapidly. And that's another thing actually that I get a lot is like things have been warmer in the past, so why is it an issue now? Well, warmth is not an issue. It's warming that's the issue. Change, rapid change of any kind, warming, cooling, increase in CO2, decrease in CO2. It's not, oh, CO2 levels are high, so that's bad. If they got there gradually, life evolved to that. They're fine. But if they get there rapidly, that's dangerous because that causes extinctions. It doesn't harm Earth. Earth, has mass extinctions, it goes on, but it harms the life on Earth. And like things that are evolved to a certain condition, like we humans are to oxygen levels, CO2 levels, temperatures, pH conditions, like corals are very sensitive to like temperature and pH. They will dissolve if the pH gets lower, especially deep water. The deep water is more acidic than, there's so many things like going on, intricate details going on there that are killing things right now. And like, there are things that have evolved to these certain conditions. And when things change rapidly, things cannot survive and they go extinct. It's not that it's warmer, that it's bad. It's that it's warming rapidly. It's the rate of change that's dangerous. So I think that's a major issue. And also the save Earth thing is good intentioned, but a miscommunication of the problem.
And that's why it's really important to have science communicators like you to explain down complex topics.
Well, and that's something, of course, and of course, like Facebook pages like yours, they're so important. That's something also I want to like emphasize too, is like I'm talking like I'm know all this and that, but like I love learning about and talking about these things because these are things I didn't know early, like even before grad school. Probably I had a geology degree and I didn't know these things, and I thought, yeah, that is a good question. Why is it bad? that there is increasing CO2 if it's happened in the past. I asked those same questions, and now I know why it's different, and it's the rate. It's not the actual magnitude. And I never knew that before I started doing this and actually communicating science. And so it's like on my page too, I'm not communicating things I know. I'm communicating and making videos about things I don't know, but just learned a bunch about and want to share. So I'm kind of learning along with my audience. And I really like that aspect about it, because like, yeah, these aren't things that I've known. Like, these are things that I wondered, and I want to let people know in a way that's hopefully fun and visually exciting too. How many people we got?
Yeah, so people are like still joining or leaving. So
yeah.
we have 15 people
Okay.
watching this live. So if you have any questions, please you can ask questions in the comment section, and Rachel will be able to answer your questions. Jenny, there's a comment from Jenny, and she is saying lots of really good info here. I'm looking forward to replaying the presentation and learning more in depth.
Oh, good.
And
It's going to be recorded. Okay.
another
Awesome.
comment from Asma, great explanation. Thank you.
Is this going to be like a recording just on Facebook, or can I like send, or well, can I send the link out to my followers too?
Yeah, so it will be recorded automatically, and
Okay.
it will be available to watch later on Learning Geology Facebook page. And I can
Okay,
share
cool.
it with
I'll
you.
just send like the Facebook link to my
Yeah.
people. Cool. Yeah, just send me that whenever. Yeah, I should probably get a Facebook. I'm so bad at social media. It's so weird that I'm on it.
We have a comment from Samia Khan. I'm a regular audience. I watch all your videos.
Yay! Oh, hello. I'm so glad you're here.
We have a comment from Jenny. During the formation of planet, where did the accretion material come from?
That's a great question. See, this is why I really wanted to go in more detail, but I just didn't have time. So basically, before our solar system came to be, and before the dust cloud came to be that allowed our solar system to form, there was another star and potentially solar system, or some sort of system there with the star. And when stars get to a certain age, basically they start out producing like hydrogen, helium, and then their cores get heavier and heavier. And the point that they get to iron, if you go down the periodic table, they fuse protons until they get to iron. And when they get to iron, they explode because they can't handle the weight like of the gravitational compression. So they explode in what's called a supernova. And when stars explode in a supernova, they create this big dust cloud, and it's called a solar nebula. And it's spinning around, and then another star starts to accrete in the center, and starts to the same process over and over again. That's why our own star, our sun, is kind of in like the middle of its life, and it's going to be like 5 more billion years, and then it's going to explode, and then another solar system will start to form. So it's this whole star process. But there are also, I believe, like different types of stars that last longer or shorter. Our star is like classified as a certain like dwarf something. I don't know. I'm not an astronomer, but that's my extent of astronomy knowledge for you.
We still have time, and we can take more questions. So if you have any further questions, you can ask. There's a comment, not really a question, from Samia. She's saying, I watch you regular. That's why I'm here at 5 a.m. for you to watch and It's a new geology student here.
5 a.m. Oh my gosh. Where are you coming from? Maybe she can comment again. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Wow, that's so cool. Yeah, I didn't realize, like, I don't know, I still feel like I have a small little tight-knit community on YouTube. And then I went to this event not too long ago in El Paso, where I live right now, and I was giving this like short talk, not even about like science. It was about like YouTube and like how to, it was to teachers in the area, science teachers. And it was about teaching on YouTube and using YouTube as a resource. And I had a girl come, like a young girl who was like in the STEM communication field, come from Houston. And I was like, what? For me? It was crazy. So yeah, it's really cool that you guys are so supportive. You guys are the best.
That's really amazing. So she's saying she's from India.
Oh, it's awesome. I have such a loyal and amazing Indian audience. You guys are the best.
We have a question from Ted. Great presentation. Do you know if how depletion of trace metal nutrients in the oceanic marine environment of the boring billion affected organisms at the time?
Wow, this is complex. I mean, this is like really advanced stuff. Okay, so so one more time. So how trace metal nutrient,
so
what was it?
how depletion of trace metal nutrients
Mhm.
in the I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly,
Oceanic.
oceanic marine environment of the boring billion affected organisms at the time.
That's a great question. I don't know. I feel like, well, I don't know. I don't know enough about, I know about two major trace metals, because those are the things I study, which is molybdenum and thallium, which are nutrients, but, well, thallium's not really, but molybdenum is a major nutrient, and it does get sequestered in euxinic environments. And so I guess that would cause some sort of nutrient depletion, but probably not to a degree where things would be actually, because that trace elements are typically needed only in very small concentrations. I guess iron maybe would be a big one, because that would form iron sulfides in those environments. But I would guess that there was still, within the boring billion, there was still relatively complex microbial communities that could allow for, because there are organisms that can use iron sulfide substrate directly to take it up and metabolize it, and that creates like iron and sulfur ions, which other bacteria can metabolize. So I would imagine that there was some sort of, still use of these things, but I bet it was probably, I bet it probably did lead to some, kind of low levels of productivity due to the depletion of the iron, and I guess like phosphorus too. I don't know. That's something that maybe I'll look into for your future video. That's a really interesting question.
Yeah, maybe idea for your new video.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I study like my research is about reconstructing euxinic environments, but I only study, so I mean everything, whenever you do a PhD, it's so niche. So I only look at molybdenum, which and I should probably get like a greater overall view of like trace metal and trace element nutrient depletion at the time. But I don't know, molybdenum and like uranium and rhenium are like the few trace metals that are actually sequestered in euxinic environments. And a lot of the other ones are sequestered in oxic environments by scavenging by manganese oxides. And they all have like an asymptote that they hit in dissolved concentration, where they don't ever go to zero in the solutions. And I think they never really get to levels that are so low that it would be critical for life, because they are so, like, they're needed by life, but in such minute amounts. So I'm not sure if they would have really gotten low enough to cause critical conditions. I don't know.
He's saying, so thank you. Sorry about the tough question. You did a great job answering.
Oh, thanks. I'm gonna look into it seriously, because that is something that I researched, so I should know that.
Yeah. And there's another comment from Heather. Thank you. Loved listening to you. We'll definitely check out your YouTube.
Oh, yay, thank you. Yeah, my YouTube channel, guys, for this talk, I made it as as basic as I know how to. I'm still bad. Sometimes I say jargon and I forget it's jargon. Like anoxia, sometimes I forget to define that. But like, yeah, I tried to make it more basic. On my YouTube channel, it's things get pretty, when it gets to Earth history, I can get pretty advanced. So like you'll hear euxinic quite a bit. So I talk about that a lot. But yeah, I try to define everything. So if you want something, you know, advanced and kind of like college level almost, go there. I do have some more basic videos, but yeah, I don't have anything like, I don't have like the difference between sedimentary and igneous and metamorphic rock. Like I don't get that basic. So if you're at that level, like maybe I'm not for you, but if you are interested in the very like intricate details of Earth history and ocean chemistry at times in Earth's history, like I definitely dive into that.
There's a question from Samia. Do you think we sometimes get mistake microfossils with rock microstructures or mineral radiation traces kind of things?
Absolutely. Well, on Earth, we've gotten so good at recognizing how certain structures form and how they formed throughout Earth's history, and knowing, you know, especially with regards to like stromatolites, they're very obvious in the rock record because there is no abiotic process that would form the kind of, you know, squiggles that they form in the like humpy shape that they form and the size that they form and the composition of rock that they're preserved in. So they're very distinct if you look at all the factors of the rock. There are certain things like if you've ever seen manganese oxide dendrites, I kind of want to pull up an image just to show because they look like plant fossils. I'm going to look it up really quick. Dendrites. And those, like I had a lab, a paleontology lab where they gave us these fossils to identify and they put that in there as a trick question. And my entire lab, including myself, who I was very sad about this, we all got it wrong. We all said, I don't know, some sort of plant, but it wasn't. Let me share my screen. So these kinds of like, you see like the tree like structures in these, they're like these black manganese oxide forming. Oh, this one's good. Like this is like oxidized a bit, but like you can see like it's called dendritic because it's tree like. That's, you know, the dendrite, you know, root. And so these are like tricky. If you find them now, of course we know all about them because we've studied, you know, rocks and fossils a lot as a whole, you know, community of scientists. But if you're a student in a paleontology lab, that one's tricky. But yeah, there's a lot of structures I feel like on Earth that we can distinguish pretty well. I mean, there's a whole like field of study that is trying to figure out what's abiotic signatures and what's biotic signatures, even if it's just like isotope ratios in a rock, chemical signatures in a rock, not even something physical that's visible, like just the chemistry of a rock, whether it was possible to form abiotically or only could form in a biologically facilitated scenario. And I actually study a lot about like molybdenum biosignatures in my lab and whether they can, you know, act as biosignatures or if they can also form abiotically, because that's really important for looking for biosignatures on other worlds, because maybe it's not something that we'll see with our eyes like a fossil, but maybe we can, you know, look at the carbon isotopes and be like, that was life. You know, because on early Earth, some of our earlier evidence for fossils earlier than 3.5 billion years ago, with the cyanobacterial mats, was actually just chemical signatures, carbonaceous rocks with carbon isotopes that made us think life was there. The reason is because there's carbon isotopes with different masses, and this one had a really light to heavy ratio of carbon isotope masses. It had more of the light isotope, and that happens when, you know, plant material or photosynthesizing organisms cause that deposit to form. In other words, like dead plant material, you know, dead tree trunks, whatever, form carbonaceous deposits in the rock record. They cause a really light to heavy isotope ratio because they preferentially take up carbon, light carbon from the atmosphere, light carbon isotopes over heavy ones. So they create this signature in the rocks, even if their fossils are completely gone, that is clearly indicates like life was there, plants were there, or photosynthesizers of some kind. But there's still a lot of studies going on to see whether there's abiotic processes that can produce those signatures, because we want to say that life started or was at least 3.9 billion years ago when we see those signatures, but it's really hard to confirm that if it's just isotopes telling us that. We need something else to really back it up. So there's a lot of study going into what's abiotic and biotic. Sorry for droning on there.
Thank you so much, Rachel. We're really close to the end of this live session, but perhaps we can take one more question. And we have a question from Lane. Rachel, nice job. Do you think that GOE or NOE could lead to an acidification of the marginal marine environment due to oxidation of sulfides?
Acidification due to oxidation of sulfides. That's an interesting question. I don't know. Most of the ocean acidification things I've looked at, I mean, are because of warming periods, because of CO2, but I didn't think about oxidation of sulfides leading to acidification. I don't think so, because I don't think that that would really increase proton concentration, which is pH level, too much. I don't think that would alter that, because you'd have the oxidation of the oxygen reacting with the, like, say it's iron sulfide, the sulfur creating, I don't know, sulfur dioxide or sulfate ions in the ocean, and you've got the, iron creating iron oxides, rusty stuff. I don't think it would release that much, like, protons, like the way that, CO2 reacts with water to release a bunch of protons to form bicarbonate. So I don't know. That's a great question. I would have to look further into it.
We have 3 more interesting questions. Rachel, it's up to you. Do you think we can take those questions?
I'm good.
Okay. So the next question is from Ted. What do you foresee happening in the field of geological history in the next few years? Any exciting discoveries you're looking forward to?
No. It's not all that exciting anymore, because we have most of it, like, relatively figured out. I think the biggest things that could happen are, like, just getting more details about things, like the first snowball Earth event, for example, getting more detail about how extensive the glaciers actually were, if they weren't globally extensive or if they were, and there's always this, like, refinement of our details of Earth history. And that's actually my dissertation, is all about refining not even the picture of Earth's history, but our proxies that we use to reconstruct Earth history. I basically do a bunch of experiments in the lab with molybdenum and sulfur and oceanic, vials, which is just lacking oxygen and very rich in sulfide. And I study the solution and the reaction and the precipitates that form, the solids that form, to understand what kind of molybdenum signatures form in different conditions, so that we can refine our reconstructions. Instead of seeing molybdenum in the rocks and saying, oh, it's really sulfide rich, maybe we can also look at it and say, and the pH was this, and the iron content was this, and the other other chemical parameters and stuff. So really at this point, it's more of like refining our understanding of Earth's history rather than getting like big discoveries. I don't think there's much big out there that we don't know. I am trying to think. There's, like, in my field particularly, I study reconstructions of oxygen conditions, so rises and falls in oxygen concentrations. And I think the biggest questions in our field currently that we still are unanswered, but we have hypotheses, is whether oxygen, like the level that oxygen rose during the GOE and NOE, because we have kept changing that with better reconstructions over time. And we used to think that the GOE rose oxygen to around 10% modern atmospheric levels, and the NOE rose it to 100%. Now we know it was more like a full oxygen rise to 100% in the GOE 2.4 billion years ago, and then it rebounded back down to this kind of unstable 1 to 10% for the entire boring billion, from 1.8 to 0.8 billion years ago, until the NOE around 0.7 or 700-ish million years ago, when it rose again to near modern levels, but not 100%. And then it kind of went up on a steady fluctuating incline in the Paleozoic, and then was up in the Carboniferous and down. Like, so we're doing this refinement of these oxygen fluctuations in my field, but there's nothing like, I don't think we're going to be like, oh, the GOE didn't happen, or like it happened before. Like, there's nothing huge in my opinion. I don't know. Maybe that's exciting to you. So there you go. Sorry, I'll try to answer fast next time.
Next question is from again from Samia. So she's saying, do we call them, those structures, similar to biosignatures? And do you think there are so many researchers which have already done previously research should be revised?
So the first part was the structures being biosignatures. Do they mean the dendritic structures that I showed?
Yeah.
Those are not. Those are, I mean, now we know they form abiotically by manganese oxide solution, forming this. It's the way the mineral structure is that causes it to look dendritic or tree-like, but it's not biological in any way. So no, those are not biosignatures, but they're commonly mistaken as them by lab students. But the second part, like, has everything been done, or should we continue revising it? That's the answer to that from me is always yes. We always need to continue revising things, because I mean, if you actually look at scientific papers, like, in my research, I have to read papers all the time, and they're always being published. And it's like, I mean, when you get to a specific field, it's always like the same 10 authors, but we're always, finding certain things that we're like, oh, we didn't think about that, or like we didn't look at that the right way, or we assumed it was this, but now we're seeing it's this. There's always little things that, even if it's a small change, it's really significant, and they build up over time to be very significant developments in our understanding. And I think that it's always important for us to continue revising. And like I talked about at the beginning of the talk, studying Earth's history is just kind of fun, but it's also really important for understanding modern Earth processes and climate and environmental changes and trends, and predicting future ones. Because, for example, we can look at past ocean anoxia events, or events where oxygen decreased, and then we can look at what triggered that, and what might trigger one in the current or modern ocean, and how that might affect life, and what types of species it affects fastest and the greatest, and how those might affect future ecosystems. And like, it's really important for us to look at these things. Like, I get a lot of questions because I study Earth's history. People are like, why does it matter? But it really, really does matter for our understanding of modern Earth too.
Just a comment from Kristen. That's way cool. I did not know that fossils could just be chemical traces, which makes total sense as you put it.
Yeah, when I learned about that too, I was like, what? No way.
And there's a new, just a new question from Nelson. Very nice presentation. Would you consider advanced YouTube/Patreon presentations on Nuna, Rhodnia, and Pangaea addressing their unique climate and geobiology? Thank you.
That's a great question. I'm actually currently taking a break from posting YouTube videos just because I ran out of videos. I normally film them ahead of time, and I go about my research during the semester, and I just was working really hard on my dissertation this semester and ran out of videos. So these couple weeks, I'm really trying to do a bunch of videos and batch them. And one of them is supercontinents through Earth's history and how they've affected Earth and like Earth's evolution. So I am working on some that will talk about Columbia and Rodinia and all the, Pangaea, all the things, and how I'm not sure if that will still remain the video topic, or if I'll break them out to talk in more detail. But that is one of the topics I hope to work on. I think that's a really interesting question.
I think that's all the comments we have. Ted, say thank you so much. This has been so informative.
Hey, thank you guys so much for watching.
I think we can conclude our session now. Thank you again, Rachel, so much for your amazing presentation and sharing your time in the middle of your busy PhD completion. And thank you all for joining and asking wonderful questions. Please join us for the next 2 sessions in the coming days. And that's all. Thank you so much. We wish you a great rest of your day.